bit more. Okay, so welcome everyone. We scheduled this call to talk about funding Emergence and Metacelium. So excited to be with you all. I thought I would give a very quick worldview lens that we've been using that's been helpful in orienting a lot of the conversations I've had with all of you recently. But specifically what is helpful to know is that at the core of a lot of what we're doing, we're inviting us to pay attention to what we're paying attention to and to shift from problem-oriented consciousness into possibility and what we want to create. And so one of the shifts in perspective we invite everyone to notice is that right here, right now, today, it is possible. Oh, Jim's here. Wonderful. Hey, Jim, welcome.
Hey, Forrest, how are you?
Good. We're just getting oriented a little bit. Yeah, welcome and excited to have you here.
Good to be here, and I'll be able to be here about 45 or 50 minutes.
Perfect.
Great to be with everybody.
So what we're talking about is the shift in perspective to basic survival needs being met for every human being, and going from working on, for example, SDG 1 and 2, no poverty, no hunger, shifting from problem-oriented consciousness to possibility, and saying instead of getting rid of hunger and poverty, what if we focus on basic survival needs being met, and then the implications of that. And the implications are pretty drastic. There's no aspect of the human experience that remains untouched. But the important thing is there's two main lenses we're looking at. One is the generative creative lens of creating the world we want. And the other is the regenerative healing lens of healing the world that we've had. And so everybody on this call seems to be involved in one or both of those in many different contexts. And so on the leading edge, a couple of things that we wanted to, leading edge meaning possibility side, a couple of the things that we really wanted to touch on tonight were how can we fund emergence? How does money want to support people who are stepping one step beyond the frontier of consciousness, and support bringing in the systems, institutions, technologies, cultures, and ways of being that are embodied examples of the emerging economy? And how can we have a system and an ecosystem that supports emergence? And how can we reward the investors who are putting money into this ecosystem as one of the most important components of supporting this emerging ecosystem? So Jared and I have talked a little bit about what would it be like to have a credit card for emergence that was based deeply on trust, and where practitioners of emergence could meet the moment financially and be able to source and resource what wants to happen. So there's a lot more we could talk about, but I feel like that's maybe enough footing to get us grounded in the groundless. So here we are, and would love to hear how that is for you all, and what you're coming into this call with, what's most alive for you right now.
I guess what's coming to mind for me was a kind of like an analogy or a story that someone named Adam Wright, Turquoise knows him. Hey, Turquoise. A story that Adam Wright told me about a SEAL team when they went to capture Saddam Hussein. There was a timeline of about like months to years of like capturing Saddam and actually getting in there as like a top-down command and control. But instead, they gave everyone the freedom to just kind of go like a swarm of bees, and they got them in 24 hours. So allowing the people on the ground to make the decisions that they need to make really kind of worked out very well for them in that situation. So I'm kind of looking at this world right now and seeing the need for the people on the ground like Turquoise, really, to be able to make the decisions without the overhead or the need for it would help a lot to be able to have some funds to keep the basics covered. So.
And Jared, can you share your example from the Emerge gathering in Austin last week?
Yeah, which example?
Just that the moment arose to get a couple of Airbnbs and how you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I there were two groups that I really needed to connect, because I knew it was really important in my own life. And those were Maple, the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth, that's up in Vermont, and Forrest Landry, who is very much at the basin or the center of a lot of this, what's called the liminal web, or a lot of game B and those kind of ideas as well. So I ended up getting a Airbnb with my own funds to have a house for them to kind of connect at. And Turquoise was able to stay there. And over time, I mean, we actually ended up getting really incredible conversations out of that stay there, which are up at liminaldao.xyz. But those connections that were made there are actually blossoming into really incredible things. And I just was able to do that based off of the little funds that I had. But it was something that I felt a deep desire to do based off of sacredness, like the feeling of sacredness that I've had with both of those people, or both of those groups, were really that just was the thing that made it possible. So
Yeah, thanks, Jared. And Sarah, my attention's coming to you, and just the possibility for folks on the ground like Jared to have access to more financial resources, and then for people who are providing those to be financially incentivized to do so. So over to you.
So there are a few things that are coming to me, like what you were talking about is, we could talk about for days, literally, just from the little introduction you did. But the things that came to me, first of all, something that I'm very aware of at this moment, for many people who are in this field of, whether it's shifting consciousness, building the new systems, making things work for all of us, rather than a few of us, in the many different forms that shows up. And I'm in touch with more and more networks that I had no idea about, of extraordinary things that are going on across the world. What's come to me very clearly is that most of the people who lead or sit at the center of those initiatives have a history and actually a personality that we have all built around that pioneering entrepreneurial struggle, to do something that the world isn't ready for yet, or whatever language we come up with. And that's been our strength, because it's what kept us in there all that time when most people would have given up and said, I can't do this. But as a personality, it's very, very uninviting to money. And I'm actually running an event next week. And if anybody's interested to join us, I decided to open it up a little privately. It's really something I do with funnily, you use the word leading edge. I run a group called the Leading Edge. And it's a group I normally do with them, but I thought, well, I'll invite a few other people. And it's actually it's kind of like a healing of those parts of our personality that we don't need anymore, because to operate that way means you always operate short of cash. And it's not that money doesn't want to come to you. Money's totally fully available to anybody who's available to it. It's actually that the people doing that kind of work have really practiced not being available to money. And it's like the starving artist. It's a different kind of stereotype, but this is that kind of pioneering, whatever it is. And it's a lot of guts and a lot of this and that, but very little cash. So I feel it's really important for us to recognize those aspects of ourselves so that we can gracefully let go of them. It may take a few months, but I'm quite sure that will happen. The other thing I can really only speak at probably a bit of a meta level, but I see, like, there are two opportunities in the investment space that I'm looking at for the investors part of it. we haven't quite designed it yet, but I do want to name it here because it feels really important. In the business that I'm a co-originator of, which is called Love To, we've figured out a way to value living assets. So for example, when people put their time and energy into regenerating land, farmers, for example, or protecting the environment or improving their health and well-being, we figured out how to value that. But the thing that I'm really interested in is if somebody invests in that, we can get them a return, which is a good return as a normal investment. But if people who are regenerating the land, for example, are creating actually more value than people who are digging out gold, for example, if environmental ecological improvement is more valuable than gold or diamonds or oil or the other things that have been extremely valuable to us, how about the people who invest in living assets? Also, that there's a way to provide additional return based on the value that they are creating. It's not a reward. We don't need to reward people for being good. It's not about that to me. It's about where are we creating value that is more valuable than what we've valued before. We value dead trees, but we haven't valued living trees. We put a price on people when they're sick because they cost money, but we don't really put a value on healthy people because we just, that's by default sort of thing. But if we switch all of the value around, then we start to think very differently. So what about the people who invest in living value? That's an investment that supports the benefit of all. And so we're looking for a mechanism, and I think we're very close to working out how to do that, whereby that creates additional value that accrues to the investor, just as it's going to the producers of that value in the first place. And to me, when we get that formula, the whole system sings. That's the best way I can describe it. When I first saw that possibility, that was an experience I've never had in my life of like, wow. So we're working on it. That's all I can say at the moment. And I guess in the next 6 months or so, it'll probably get clear how to do it in a practical way where the investor doesn't have to think I'm a good person or I'm doing the right thing. I mean, we've already built a system where the investment is just a sound, solid investment. But how do we make it so that we recognize the value that people's money can bring into the system? So it's not an instant solution, but I think that it's a happening one. Turquoise. You mean the investment piece?
So I think you had said there's a investor return aspect to investing in regenerative ecosystem thriving, and then there's a reward piece or a something.
You're creating more value through your invest. If you let's put it this way: if you invest in ecological improvement, that creates more value than in putting your money into gold, for example. Or putting your money into some things actually create a negative value, really, because they're destructive. So if it's creating more value, if that investment is creating more value, then we should be able to measure that value. I mean, it's a bit crazy because your mind goes crazy because we're so used to scarcity thinking. No, it's not a reputation-based system. This is about recognizing real value, living value that's been created by people doing good things that are valuable for the wider, for our wider communities, or valuable in the commons as well at times. I think there's something very interesting in this whole thing about the commons. So we look at a farmer and we say, okay, you produce beef or you produce whatever. But you're also producing an ecological product if you are farming regeneratively. So we're able to put a value on their ecological product and then bring money to that. It's an ecological investment, essentially. But supposing the investor is also creating additional value, they're not only investing in the normal way, but by investing in something that creates that kind of value, they're creating more value for for all of us, because they're making a choice. They could spend their time investing in arms, for example. They're making that choice to invest in something that's value for all of us. If we can put a value on ecological improvement, we can put a value on investing in ecological improvement. And it's a bit crazy because then it's like the positive, real, true, expansive nature of what a Ponzi scheme is the negative, untrue, destructive version of. It's this expansive nature of life, like a mushroom cloud that expands in every direction at the same time, kind of thing. It starts to expand itself. Yeah, that's what I can say.
What I'm hearing is there's an initial investor is maybe on a project, but there is a looking for what was the word that I was thinking of before? Like a metric. I'm forgetting the word. So a measurement,
a metric of the value.
Commons good, like a commons good metric or a measurement for not only the initial investment that's coming back, but the added value of a complex dynamic system that is a common good metric that you can also invest in common good metrics and direct one-to-one investment regenerative projects. Yeah.
Well, that might be. I hadn't thought of it as a common good one necessarily. I think the commons is a part of all of this, and it's something that we're beginning to look at. It doesn't necessarily, but that might be a really good idea, what you've just said, and I'll feed that into the kind of into the processing of how we do it, because that is a really interesting idea.
Transformative, like, so this is like regenerative, the privileging of new value systems at a higher, and then kind of it almost feels like an abstraction of new value systems to invest in those in aggregate, maybe.
In some way, everything we do is on the principle of aggregation.
Yeah.
Because farmers can't reach institutional investment because they're too small. So by aggregating them, we make them investable.
Beautiful.
And it may be a way that I don't know. There's a piece like there's just my business partner is really the kind of the one with all the gears in his brain, and I just have these ideas, and he goes away and says, "Here, this is how we can do it, Sarah." And this one it's in the works. It's actually amazing for me to be able to have this conversation, because I can't normally even talk about it with people, because people don't even begin to understand the value of that. But if we can do that to me, that shifts, it makes investing in good not only provide a solid investment return, but it actually provides, it's like, well, we're investing in the most valuable thing. You should get the best return on your investment that way. That makes sense. It puts our value system in the right direction.
Yeah, and culturally kind of puts a marker place for a type of investment that, you can wrap some kind of an identity around, or a new narrative.
That's right.
Of like, this is a thing, and this is the better thing to invest in.
That's right. Yeah, because we've already got, we have shares and options. So we have things that are, and we've just found a way that we can back cryptocurrencies with these assets, so that you can kind of stabilize that. That should be ready in about 6 weeks, which is very exciting, so that you don't have this kind of speculative. We can get beyond that speculation. But if we can do that additional piece, that to me is it's not the missing link, because what's there already is really solid, but it kind of creates an expansion fund, so to speak, an expansion approach rather than a syntropic. It's a syntropic investment. It's like whatever it touches, it does good.
Love it. Thank you for saying more on that. I appreciate that.
I can share a little bit. I'm one of the early investors in this Love to Be Mutual around sustainable agriculture, and I'm not sure if you are aware of that, Sarah, but I grew up in a family business, 4 generations rooted in conventional agriculture. And so my whole life has been invested in that, and it never made sense to me. And I've been in search of an agricultural system that is aligned with nature. And the means of the investment is working with nature. And the biggest differences in my experience in my family business is that the very framework is a scarcity framework, and the investment is to extract nature's gifts and people's labor to accumulate wealth, which in my experience creates stagnation and separation and dysfunction in terms of the chance for thriving. When I look at love to be in the agricultural space, my whole system lit up when I met your partner Tim through Jeff.
You must be a friend of Jeff's.
That's how I came.
I'm so sorry that I didn't even recognize your name, because all of that happened kind of just on the side.
Yeah, no, I fully understand. But
oh my God, you people just, you made our whole thing move last year. I'm so grateful for your existence.
Well, what's really cool about it for me is energetically, when I just sit in the presence of everybody on this call, one of the things that Forrest convenes a call, I do whatever I can to show up, because I light up in the presence of the people who come to these calls. And right now, my whole system is alive. And when I look at the love to approach, the moment I put real dollars into that, what's really cool is, first of all, it's rooted in abundance. The whole system's being informed by nature and how it works. And I felt like I was infusing money in support of natural systems, supporting rebalancing and thriving and wholeness. And it's really cool, because the other thing I noticed is, wow, I invested this money and energy into a circulatory system, not an accumulating system. And it's resonating deeply with the abundance of natural principle and in support of. For me, the big return is more farmers move from conventional agriculture to agriculture infused with and giving life to and in support of and congruence with nature. Well, the value in that, I can't even conceive of it.
I know.
But I'm really
it's
aware.
It's so nice, because you so get what this is. You absolutely get it with your being.
And we're now, as a society, feeling all the hidden costs of generations of conventional agriculture. And right when it's about to implode, along comes this. Wow. And then when I look at the number of hectares of land and farmers who are agreeing to come to play the new game, wow.
And I tell you one thing, the supply of farmers and the growth of what's possible on that side is so huge. They're like they're lining up, and these are some of the best. They will pass on everything they know, because finally they will have enough funds to have enough bandwidth to be able to do more than just do what they do.
So cool.
Such an exciting moment. So I have to say to you, Jim, just because it was like, was it last week? Where are we? Last week, we issued $330 million worth of options to farmers and through the system, basically.
Congratulations. So thrilling.
It's such an extraordinary thing. And so, those literally people can buy them. And from the moment that they were actually issued, it was like people started to come towards us, that it's so in the field. And that's why your question, Forrest, about money is like, when we take the steps, now the investors are coming towards us. Suddenly we're being given meetings and things, because we're not an idea anymore. The world is full of ideas. I used to drive Tim crazy by saying an idea isn't worth anything, because he's a very creative person. So his ideas were everything. I said, creativity is creating something. Actually, there must be a thing. So we have a thing. We have a whole lot more coming in a few weeks. There'll be another $350 million worth or something. But literally from these milestones, when we actually create the thing, that opens the doors, and it opens us. It takes us through those processes of opening our energy to be able to actually participate in that money energy. So it's a real nice to be here, and thank you.
Sushant and Scott, I'd love to invite your voices in. What's happening for you now?
Sushant's going to outweight me. Okay. Go ahead, Sushant.
Yeah, I can go. Thank you. That's been really wonderful sharing so far. I think going back to the money and survival thing, I think, what's trying to emerge, I think where the money comes from does matter, right? Like we have labor market, capital market, crypto market, and we basically, people have been talking about for some decades around wisdom market. And so it's emerging in different ways. These are not clear market, and we're seeing intersection of one over the other, and all of that is there. And there's close to about $1.2 trillion waiting to go into UN SDGs in forms of grants, in forms of startup capital, in forms of equity capital, and all of those stuff. So there is money there. And so the thing that I find interesting about emergence is, can emergence be an asset class, right? Can we think about emergence as an asset class? And my short answer to this is yes. There's a strategy behind it, and that's something that I'm working on. Is what is emergence, right? Emergence is happening in pretty much every field, everywhere. We are living in between times where some of the old ways of doing it's very clear it's not working, and the new ways of doing are emerging in all different forms, whether it be technology or whether it be finance or psychology or whatever it might be. There's a new cognition that's emerging, and that's very exciting. That's penetrating every field. No, it's no longer cool to be isolated in one field, right? The whole age-old discussion around, should it be a generalist or a specialist is no longer relevant. We have to be specialist in few things and generalist in the other, right? So there's a new paradigm that's emerging that's very exciting. And so it's future is coming at us really fast, and I think we're trying to adapt to it. Going back to emergence as an asset class is very exciting, because what we're trying to really understand is listen into what's trying to emerge, but like what Sarah is talking about, it shouldn't be just an idea. It should be a thing that can get funding, that can be moved forward. It has to be in the tangible world, right? So what we're seeing is just the involution of some of those later stages or like later higher states of consciousness, ideas generated at that level coming down into a product, into a company, into a market, those kind of things. And that's very exciting to be at. And so the work that I'm involved in is, so there's two types of thinking, two types of strategy. One is a meta strategy, and another is fractal strategy. So what is meta strategy? Meta strategy will basically look at a problem issue from a meta level, meaning, how do we basically understand that issue from all the different domains of knowledge, right? If it's climate change, it's no longer just a scientific problem. It's also a cultural problem. It's also a psychological problem, right? So meta level thinking gives us access to a multi-perspective on an issue. Fractal thinking, fractal strategy is basically you develop something and then you basically push it in such a way that it impacts all the other domain of knowledge, right? So I've been playing with those fractal and meta strategy for some time. And so the one that I'm working on right now, and I'll also have some more to share in coming months, would be I'm working on with a fractal strategy of building emergence into startup companies and getting them funded. So this has been an ongoing strategy of mine and ongoing explorations of mine. And you can find some information on my website. I'll have more as the case study comes out. But the idea is basically, yes, I think funding the emergence is really important. We need to have a very clear strategy, what that means, what kind of vehicles are we funding, and who's getting funded, and all of that stuff. So yeah, I'll share more as we talk more. But so great, great to be here and just listen to everything that's coming up here. So I'll have a lot more to share.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks everyone. This is very interesting. Like Jim, I really feel when Forrest calls a meeting, then I feel like it's an expansive place for me to be. And yeah, there's that's very apparent here. It was interesting to hear Sarah start, because sort of my personal history has been very much as that project initiator who never had any money, but just like knew the thing that needed to be done, and just starting companies and starting nonprofits and all of that stuff just sequentially, and of course, like many people, many of those at the same time. Yeah, and it's actually for those who don't know, it was my getting involved in the early days of crypto that reoriented my relationship with capital, and yeah, brought me to a place where I had a shift where up until about 2015 or 2016, the computer, because I was an early web pioneer. The computer had been my primary lever for sort of affecting the change that I wanted to see. And so I did a lot of work with, Greenpeace and various, ecology groups and sustainable transportation and stuff like that. And then with the way that the crypto market, the way that cryptocurrency evolved, I realized I now had a second tool in my tool chest, which was capital, and in particular crypto capital. So it's been my journey sort of since then, is to figure out, now that I have sort of more appreciation, certainly more understanding about sort of wielding capital, like how I can combine those things. And where I've settled and what I've done is mostly going back to sort of what I'm familiar with, is people who have an idea, who have that burning desire and need that little push to give it a start. And so looking for interventions sort of at that place, and providing that, and continuing to provide support around the development of those ideas. I still maintain sort of my meta view or fractal view of technology and Web3. I'm very, very intrigued by Web3, and that's a natural evolution for me as well. So those are the pieces, sort of understanding of crypto, Web3 technology, and then embedded very much so in emergence and consciousness.
Thanks, Scott.
Jared, I just saw the question. Could you expand on the question a little bit, and maybe we can explore that together?
Yeah, I guess I might not be the right person to fully describe it, but the way that I think of generator functions, I heard it from Daniel Schmachtenberger's talks. It's basically like the thing at the root. So like there's all these other these crises that are happening, but at the root of it, there is, capitalism or whatever the generator function is that's causing all of the meta crisis things happening. So the way that you're describing a fractal strategy is, something that is like affecting all the different types of things at once. That seems like it kind of is in the same category, or I don't know.
I would say so. Yes. A fractal strategy in business and investments, the way it's talked about is you basically create something that changes the paradigm in all the other. Tesla is a good example. It's not just electric car, it's also a data company. It's also a power company, right? It's changing the paradigm, right? If all this, if it goes in the direction it's going, no longer the cars will be powered, our cars will be powered by our houses, but our houses will be powered by our cars, right? So that's a fractal strategy in terms of in the startup world, I would say. Yeah. And the fractal strategy in finance would look something like Sarah is describing, something that I'm working on. And yeah, so we know the capital exists, and it's trying to find a place, and what are the different strategies that we can basically build to source that capital into the authoring the future. And in that would be, can we also basically find a way to invest in human consciousness, right?
And Sushant, hearing that, what comes up for me is, as you're well aware, we have the incubator running right now, Light in Action. Yeah. And so what we've got a cohort who are embodied examples of the emerging economy and are actualizing and bringing into being new systems, cultures, institutions, technologies, ways of being that are embodied examples of this emerging ecosystem. And we're going, okay, how can we source, the incubator is called Metacelium, right? Because we're going, how do we resource and share the information to resource and underpin that emerging economy? And, you know, one of the things I want to point to is if you almost, there's two things I want to name right now. One is, how can we have this funnel fund or refinement fund where people who have value in the economy as it is can put money into supporting projects that are in the emerging economy and be financially rewarded for bringing in the new paradigm. So obviously, Sarah, what you're doing is an embodied example of this specifically. And the second I want to point to is we're talking a lot about the shift from surviving to thriving. And one of the things we find in our incubators, we have people coming in who say, look, I can't not work on my project. Like, it has me. I couldn't stop doing it if I wanted. Yeah. Right? Like, it's like, if I stop doing my I get sick physically. And they're like, I'm $1,000 behind on my rent, or my financial being is, they self-assess themselves at 8 out of 100. I mean, these are people in our incubator, and believe me, do I know this life. I mean, the number of times I called Jim over the past year and said, hey, well, I don't know what I'm going to eat tonight. And so it's the challenge is, from a steward perspective and for holding space for someone who's working on their purpose, is, I mean, there's different stages of this, but a lot of folks spend all their time creating from fear. And then as someone working with them and holding space, we're spending a lot of time co-regulating a nervous system, deconstructing thoughts that are fear-based, and coming into the moment, letting go of all that so we can actually take action to move towards what is generative and what is regenerative. And so I'm just in this question of, is there any way, does it need to be this difficult? Is there any way it can be easier and not so taxing on nervous systems and adrenal glands? And how can we support the supporters of this emerging way of being in a way that also rewards everyone who's taking part of that? And I have some ideas, but I'm not going to present them now. I'm just going to drop the questions. So
I think I have to respond on that. There's a sort of both and piece here. As somebody who 10 years ago arrived in Australia and regularly faced that, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. And I'd spent the previous 10 years, or actually a lot longer than that, training with the Chinese master, where we were basically trained to make money that we never were able to touch ourselves. So it created a very twisted kind of financial wiring inside us. It kind of tended to go to her and not to us. And so I arrived here and I didn't know anybody. So I've been there, and it came out of that. And I think there's two parts to this, Forrest. One is, I totally get that when people are in fear, or actually when they're short of money, even if people know how to relax, because I teach relaxation to people every single day, even if they know how to relax, there's a kind of smell that comes off you. There's an energy that comes off you when you don't have enough. And you kind of can't help that. And you have to get past that somehow anyway. So that's one thing. It's like, that's a thing. That's the thing. One of the things that I've recognized as I went through the years, there were many times when I thought, I should have more money. I should have more money. Like, I need, or somebody should be funding me to do what I'm doing. It's so valuable. I knew the results I could produce for people. I saw them every single day. But when I look back on it, and this is a tough thing to say in a way, I see that if I'd had, it's not that I shouldn't have had more money, because I don't actually want to say that, but I see that I really didn't have the capacity to hold more money because I didn't have the habits, I didn't have the business capability. Like literally, I didn't know how to build systems that could do that. Now, maybe if I'd had more money and somebody really good leading me, who I doubt I would have listened to because I cared so much about what I do that I didn't want to listen to anybody. And I think a lot of us are like that. Maybe if I'd been able to trust somebody enough, they could have helped to build, with more funds, they could have helped to build a team around that work that would have enabled it to go more quickly. But what I see in practically all people doing this kind of thing, that their relationships, their money and their relationship with money, their health and well-being are all things that they need to grow. And as they grow those, the real fundamentals of life, their capacity and their capability and their skills grow. So that's not an argument for not funding that work. I think it's a really strong argument for every kind of education that we can do around all of these things, and recognizing that if we stand for thriving, our own thriving comes first. And a lot of people who put their energy into the project, they do it at the expense of themselves. And that's actually not thriving at all. And it's not their project. They've actually missed the point of their project. And I know from my work now, because of my work teaching people around their relationship with money, that is always about health and well-being, fundamentally, because I spent years learning healing. So I'm constantly, working on that. It's always about relationships, because these are the foundations of business and money. I know that there is a gentle, really quite graceful way where we can all grow in those things. And as we do, we get better and better money results. And as long as we have the focus and the willingness to engage with it, the problem a lot of the time is that because of our religious and spiritual culture across the world, we're so conflicted around money. People who want to do good are so conflicted around money because, it's literally like, if I get rich, I won't be able to go to heaven. And the monk who goes with a begging bowl is like the height of spiritual achievement or attainment in the East. These are so strong that I think deep inside ourselves, we have some real work to do around that piece. I don't think it's actually a problem about money. I do feel as a society, we have to do something about value. We are not valuing what we value. If you see what I mean, our values are completely upside down, and our financial systems are completely upside down as a result. And that's what we're all working on. But if we could really accept that the money is here, it's there, it's all around, the discipline, and the discipline of creating something that actually meets the financial systems as we have them, that's not against them, meets the requirements of retail investors and institutional investors. That is the best personal development training that I could have ever imagined. And that's where you get this, what's the word? There's a kind of friction between the old and the new that gives birth to the new. The new doesn't come out of just fluff. It's the friction between the two that creates this extraordinary spirit, which creates the most dynamic movements. I've tried just being all in the, not really fluff, I'm not very fluffy, but really being all in the new. And it's only when we embraced the old and the new together, that's the human being is the combination of these two things, or embrace the spiritual and the material and literally bring them together, that you get this kind of spirit and creativity and power. So I think this is a massive consciousness training, expanding exercise that we're in, and being all in is being all into life is is a very big part of it.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll jump into that because there's a lot to share there. And the way I think about it is, if we look at a psychograph of a person, right? Cognitive capacity, consciousness level, all of that stuff. I think we need to include finance there. Finance as a capacity and consciousness. And so oftentimes what happens, and I've done that myself throughout my 20s, is that a good idea, the distance between a good idea and an idea that gets paid is huge, and the bridge is huge. And we often want to jump from a really good idea to the idea that gets paid, right? But I think in between, we have to develop consciousness, we have to develop capacities, we have to develop skills. All of that is very important. And it is kind of like riding a bicycle. Once you learn it, even if you fall down, it's easier to ride back. But until we haven't learned to ride the bicycle, then it becomes this a difficult task to do. We need all kinds of extra wheels to support us and all of that, right? So I am in full agreement with what Sarah is talking about, is that there is that capacity and consciousness piece that needs to be developed over time. And part of the entrepreneurship that I think is really important is it's not just working on the product, but working on the capacities around finance, personal finance and management. And that's why I like venture capital a lot, because it's a milestone-based funding. You reach a certain milestone, you build a certain capacity, then you unlock another funding. Like, it's a gamifying of finance. So I think both are true. Like, we do need great ideas, and we do need ideas that needs to be funded that hasn't been funded yet. But also, people who are executing that ideas need to have the capacity, need to have the skills. So it's so. As a venture capital, always talk about product market fit, and it's basically, how does a product fit in the market? That's one aspect of it, but we really have to think about product market founder fit. Are the right founders there? Do they have the right capacity? And so the way I think about it is the product. It's not just product market fit, but it's product market founder function fit. Because all of us have a function to do in a project, and oftentimes the project is right, the product is right, the team is right, but we are not in the right function. And I think all of that awareness matters.
I so agree with you. From my this is just a little perspective, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd love to share this image you've created, Jared. Would you like to share it and walk us through it, or would you like for me to? I'd love for you to walk us through it. I can share it on my screen.
Yeah, sure. You can share. Yeah, go for it. This was something that kind of came to me when I was contemplating some of Forrest Landry's work, and I was thinking about just like ritual and going through hard things in order to come out the other side, and just broadly what that could look like. But that this was just like a broad, this just kind of came to me. So if you can imagine a situation in which there's low choice and high causation, on the left side, it's kind of like people having to do stuff because it's forcing money, that you have to pay bills, you have to do all these things. And so you're therefore going to be basically doing whatever you need to do in order to do that. But then going through some type of process that actually opens the mind, expands the mind in such a way that there is a shift and a change and more room to follow the intrinsic motivations on the other side. So this could look like, for example, Forrest has an EGP thing. It's called ephemeral group process. It's kind of this process of asking questions and just continually refining those questions in order to expand the choice field, really. So I actually literally just got off a call with him earlier today with some people, and it looks like we might actually be creating a EGP inquiry coach pretty soon. There's the beginnings of that. So that could be a really interesting tool. But yeah, this was just kind of one of these images that just kind of came to me about a lot of different, it could kind of work in a lot of different ways. So, and also the membrane once you're green on the right side, you can actually go back through the membrane on the other side. That's kind of like another added thing there. So
one of the things I just want to say, because I am really clear about the moment when I can remember the moment where I said I want to go from that extrinsic motivation to I want it to be coming from inside me. I knew I had that capacity, and it really probably took me 5 years or so of searching and trying, and and I was teaching all the time and I had access to amazing tools, but the actual doing of that is the most meaningful thing in the end, because that's what creates those pathways and makes it so strong. And I think if we can really embrace the idea that life on this planet was never supposed to be all flow and grace and ease, it's this combination, and that's what makes it a really amazing ride. That's my understanding, is that souls come here in a way because it's hard, not disgustingly horribly hard, which we have made it at times, but just because when we're drawn by what calls us, it is really challenging, but it's really kind of like there's so much to get our teeth into. And if we could embrace that membrane piece that you were talking about, Jared, rather than like, oh, I'm doing something good, I should be rewarded for it. Why aren't people recognizing my brilliance? And like, I can totally put my hand up for many thoughts along the years of like, why can't people see how much I could contribute? Then that's actually what gives us the grit but it's not really the grit, it's the capability and the capacity. And we're looking for huge capacity here, even if it's capacity of networks, we're looking for huge capacity. Yeah.
What comes up for me here in that, Sarah, is it's like I totally agree wholeheartedly. And my experience is, when we have quite a bit of stimulus, we have growth. And then when there's too much, there's too much experience for us to process in the moment it's happening, that's when we have trauma. And so for me, there's a lot of there's so much trauma that's happened over hundreds of thousands of years of human history, that it's like, how is it that folks who have trauma can have relief to process what wasn't able to be fully processed in the moment it was happening, and to allow those I call them dehydrated structures of consciousness, but those moments that are still frozen in space and time to fall back into formless and allow new moments to emerge. And so it's like, when we're in a healthy, cohesive, able to be in the moment state, and there's a lot of stimulus, we can really have a lot of growth. I mean, it makes me think of a professional athlete. But when that's been our whole life experience and our intergenerational, our whole family or culture's experience, it's like there needs to be space and time to pause and allow for processing to then be able to come back online.
I agree.
In moments.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah.
Sorry, I'll just do one thing. Forrest, you and I have talked about this, and I think that's just so true. Human beings are really amazing beings. One interesting thing happens with human beings is that in partnership, in love, romantic partnership, if our partner speaks a different language from different culture, the very fact that we are in love with each other, it makes it easier to learn that language. And it's a very fascinating thing that happens. And so the value of something like Metacelium is that I've been part of spiritual communities. I've been part of, intentional communities. Is oftentimes what happens is that because you are immersed in that field, that space, that field, the learning happens very differently. 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have imagined finance would be my thing. Although I came from the finance background, I thought psychology and consciousness would be my thing. But I've had the opportunity to work in those fields that was very generative, and that allowed me to gain new knowledge and skills in very different way than just for survival. So I think those kind of collective does matter. And I think that's why for us, when you and I spoke about it, like those values the value of such a community that's being built is just that, is that we can learn in a trauma-free world. And those kind of incubation period are very important for sure, because we can learn the same skill from a place of trauma or a place from health, and that does matter.
Yeah, I can see, Forrest, in a few years, just from what we're doing, quite apart from what other people might be doing, that somebody could spend a few years and they could make enough money to at least, you know, the survival stuff would work, from healing. So doing the healing work, because that creates value for all, maybe doing some gardening, maybe going out into nature. And there are all kinds of roles that will emerge, which are much gentler roles that suit gentler souls, because a lot of what you're talking about is highly sensitive people. We do a lot of work with highly sensitive people, and there is a lot of trauma, and a lot has been detuned, and then they're trying to make everything work on, like, just the senses that are left on, having detuned so many of them. And then there's a great intensity, and then the healing work is much more difficult. When all of your system is turned back on, it's much easier to heal. But I do see that there are, as we shift the value system, we will be able to create spaces, more spaciousness in life. I think of parents as well. Parents, you know, are people who actually need spaciousness in the early years, not the biggest pressure ever to make money at a time when they're still young and haven't really learned how to do it very well yet, have to make all kinds of unwise decisions. So I really feel that, and I see that it is possible. That's coming. And in the meantime, I agree with Sushant. I think we have to create communities in the way that we can. That's what I do through all my teaching work. That's what you do and other people do, to create communities where people can feel themselves and relax and get to know people and speak openly and not have to pretend anything. And it may take a little longer, but at least there's a place.
Yeah, and there's just several things coming up for me as you're saying that, because Jared and I recently had a conversation where we were talking about what if we had a fleet of essentially mobile coherence centers, these vans where practitioners of emergence could be outfitted for what they need to be, essentially what you kind of have these nomads on the go right now. And what if these folks were trained to be, like, really in doing this trauma work and healing work, our capacity to be fully present and to be deeply attuned and with someone in their experience is one of the greatest gifts that we have. I mean, how deeply present can I be with you in your experience? And so for me, there's the value question of, can we actually value how present we can be with someone, how attuned we can be with someone, how much, you know, I can feel you feeling me as we're having a session. And then there's, you know, it bucks the whole conventional model, which is like, the incentive structure as a coach or a therapist or a practitioner is have someone on your payroll for 36 months doing a session a week. But the best practitioners, you see them one time and you heal yourself in their presence. I mean, it just, you work yourself out. And so it's, can we reimagine value to have people who, you know, first of all, we value quality of presence and capacity for attunement, and then also that the efficiency with work with which this which things come to resolution.
Yeah, and I think there's a both and. Having been in that healing world for many years, I've seen everything can happen in an hour, but it doesn't really. As you know for yourself, I hear you speaking from your own experience that actually when there's been past trauma and when there's healing, there's round after round, it goes on through all our life. And so we need to learn how to ride the wave. So I think that it's a both and there. I'd love to continue this conversation because it's, yes, absolutely, that can be valued. There's a little bit of different thinking needed, but yes, it can be valued. There was another piece in there, I've lost it now, but yes, I just want to kind of say yes, 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 and actually all of that's possible. Most of that's already possible. And I'm going to have to go to my own community now. listen to people's questions about all of these things. So I would love to connect with everybody more and get.
Yes, Turquoise. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, I would love to. Yeah.
Lots of love, Sarah. Be well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Turquoise, would love to turn over to you.
Well, it's 5 now, and I know that we blocked some time out, 4 to 5. I want to be respectful of everybody's time before I share, say hi and introduce myself. And
I was able to extend my time, so I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you, Turquoise.
great. Awesome. Well, I feel really alive by what's been shared here, and maybe I can synthesize some of what feels most salient. Sushant, the fractal strategy that you spoke of, and kind of the meta strategy, piqued curiosity in me. Some of what I've been orienting to is organizational ecosystem cultivation and human permaculture. And so for past couple months, and a long time, but more specifically in the past couple months, have been thinking about something like fractal strategy for all-win capital. So how you would go about this systems change, and looking at triangulation models. So Jared brought up the generator functions, and using a little bit of that as a framework, how you would seed so if we're thinking of a field, you have a large investment fund and you're looking to seed it. The process by which you're selecting those projects, and this speaks a little bit to Sarah's work of an example project that we had in this model is a group that is taking second hand or ugly produce from farmers, so the produce that doesn't go to market because it looks bad, but it's perfectly good produce. They're intentionally taking that. So this is a decision on how you're making your product. You're taking what's getting thrown away, then they're taking that and they're freeze drying it and having that be basically soups for that's distributed in at low cost in kind of food deserts. And then they're also taking a profit from that, and then they're using some of their profits to invest in farmers that are regenerating their land. So they're giving loans out at a reduced interest rate, and they'll give loans out to other I believe to other farmers, but specifically those farmers that are doing regenerative process, they're going to get the better loans. So there's like a triangle kind of going on of the intentionality of every piece of the puzzle to reverse value flows. So that's one type of project. Then when you're taking that project and seeding it in an ecosystem, an investment ecosystem, let's say that organization is also triangulated with a human development organization that's also in the ecosystem and being funded, and a coordination. So coordination being, they talk about this in some of the academic literature for social impact as catalyst. Field catalysts is one name that they've been using. I've been using negative space organization. David Elrickman, I think, of Coordinate, has been calling this impact network coordinators, I believe. So we're talking about basically the unseen work of who do you partner with? How do you just all the other things that are kind of mapping this meta strategy in the ecosystem, that there's actually an intentional function of the in-betweenness of everybody and facilitating all of that goes, that the glue that holds them together, the intersystem, the fascia, the perifascia, so there's a triangle inside the organization. They don't need to be triangles. It doesn't have to be like a Pinsky sort of thing, but there's also this developing and coordinating little structure, and then to this the intentionality around picking projects around triage, transition, and transformation, right? So there are people that are going to be holding back old systems, and maybe that's like policy. Maybe these are like stopping the bleeding, right? And then transition is in the interim. This is not the best case scenario, but like, you know, maybe we do this. Maybe this is not fully regenerative. It's kind of this middle ground. And then transformation is being like, these are the edge case, you know, these are the whole of change. These are the peer-to-peer. These are like early adopter sort of things. And then using some of the models to what Jared was saying of like, for some of this triage, carrots and sticks seem to work better. So like carrots like might be financial market incentives that act as positive reinforcement for new behaviors, and sticks might be like government and that carrot was like the example of the low interest loans for those who are doing regenerative sort of farmer stuff, and then sticks like government policy that disincentivizes current behavior. So that's like a negative reinforcement. And then a motivation and intrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation being that which is instilled at the very transformative stage, right? I mean, you can embed it, but there's this question of behavioral nudging for good. But the intrinsic motivation being that which is held with care and community and facilitated by relationship, the Forrest Landry stuff, that's kind of self-directed pedagogy, pedagogy, andragogy models, fractal autonomy, all of these sorts of the essence from within. What's coming up for me is regenerative business, Carol Sanford's kind of essence being expressed like a flower, you know, being flower, the flowerness of that, right, being expressed, and the facilitation of the structures around that incentivizes that intrinsic motivation without reducing the possibility space of choice, right? So that it scaffolds just enough water and just enough soil for it to do what it naturally does, without, you know, putting stakes in the ground and binding the tree to the thing and saying grow this way, you know, sort of thing. And so these human permaculture models of like, you know, what is a garden, what is a monocrop, you know, a Monsanto monocrop structure, what is like maybe a garden or a traditional farm or a permaculture regenerative farm or a food forest, as kind of a metaphor of like how one scaffolds for like a food forest or a jungle. It's like it's growing, it's doing its thing, you're you know, you're living with it, and kind of in a more I'm thinking of Tyson Yunkaporta's like indigenous systems thinking, like you're living and growing and being with it. As it changes, you add new things, you take them out, you know, versus that kind of monocrop Monsanto version of like how orgs exist and how we resource them. And so those are just some of the things that I've been thinking about, and some of the language. And so that felt very exciting to hear in this space. And some of these, I don't know that the triangle model is a thing. Do we just have to make a bunch of fractal triangles? But some of these, like how you reversed value flows. So if you were to reverse the value flow in a system, how do you actually, what's the geometry of that? And then putting incentives at that geometry that kind of move the energy in other ways. I think Jim, you brought up the circulatory system as you know, banking in the financial institution is really the blood of the earth, and so and just our social systems. And so when you put you know, kind of, I imagine like capillaries of like funds going in, and then there's this extractive where it pulls parts back. But if it goes in and through and around that kind of circular, so you put the circular back rather than resource hoarding and having the blood pooling in the earth system. It's literally, we're dying, our blood is pooling. So thank you for staying longer to let me share and play with some of those metaphors. I'm glad to meet you all.
I want to let you know I'm really moved by your framing of triaging, transitioning, and transforming. Because one of the big things I grew up with in the conditioning of the Monsanto monoculture mentality. And the underlying motive is beautiful. It's to feed the world. But then where it really gets screwed up is, and we'll do it better than nature ever could.
With suicide seeds. Like it should,
Right.
it should, that should be the thing that like, we're gonna make it die so that we can have a patent and, you know, like, it's like right in our face. Sorry, I had to interrupt. You're nailing it. I just
really moved by the when you look at humanity making this transition. One thing, Sushant, about what you and Sarah are up to in some of your projects that really moved me the first time I met each of you is you feel like you're transitioning without severe judgment of the current system that needs triaging to survive long enough for the transformative systems to be born. And both of you have, it's what I love, it's not in opposition to what's screwed up about what needs triaging right now. It's simply the emergence of something aligned with more natural systems that have the possibility for thriving. And I love how I sense no judgment in you all as you're in this transition and transformative piece. And that's the part for me when it's not polarized and set against and then feeds the same disease. Now I need triaging too. Wow, when it can come from this more neutral place, I keep sensing in you. And Turquoise, for you to be aware, we got to honor the triage and the transition and the transformation as a whole system. Wow, I'm in awe of the wisdom you all bring to see that. And then for me, one of the things I'm having to heal through is I'm free of most of the bullshit I was conditioned as. Now I'm just deeply upset with the conventional frames and institutions that need the triaging. But I'm no longer pissed off at them. I'm now feeling their pain because I'm aware of the healing they get to go through. And now I have deep compassion for the people in the institutions that were one formative for me to form my fucked up conditioning that I got to heal for 60 years to get to play the game differently. Wouldn't trade it for anything. And now they have compassion for the state of mind and the state of the inner state that has to heal in those folks. So I'm really caught by the beauty of your human-heartedness that has care for triage, transition, transform, and values it so equally and beautifully. Really appreciate that gift.
Thank you so much. I feel honored by that expression. And I do want to say all the models that I offer, I've gotten somewhere else, and I'm just synthesizing them. Like this triangle goes there, this triangle goes.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and that's helped me. That model, that framework has helped me in an ecosystem where you might have, or just even theory of change, right? Some people are like, theory of change, we got to work with the government, and then the transformers are like, screw that, you know, and they fight like your theory of change is wrong. No, and so there's a way to hold both from this aperspectival, honoring those who are in legacy systems doing legacy work, and then coordinating across them to see it as one big thing, rather than a competition of like, you actually don't know what you're doing, we know what we're doing, but they're all part of like, I need you to hold this, I need you to hold back this wave so that it doesn't crash the sandcastle that we're building, you know? And so like, as you know, I actually need you to do that so that it doesn't crush this, you know, that this very, very fragile, you know, it's like the midwifing of this new system it's a baby, it's a, you know, and that they're in deep relationship on that it's honored, even if you know, just seeing each other for their value. Because I have looked at, you know, people that are in the transformation, I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I want to do. It's about halfway there, and honoring the halfway there-ness of it as part of the whole developmental art. Like that seems a little bit, you know, and so it helps me with that. Thank you for that.
Deeply appreciated.
And I think it's I mean, the whole sort of the economics, the capitalism, the free market economies talks about invisible hand of the market, right? So yes, we want invisible hand of the market, but we also want invisible heart of the market, and we want invisible hara of the market, right? That's what we're trying to do. And so we don't want to cut off the hand. That's not how we want to move forward. We want to basically bring other elements so that the invisible hand of the market starts to act with heart and hara, right? That's what we want. And I think this is the tantra of finance, is where you work with what you have and just digest it in such a way that you create something else. Right? So I think that's happening. I think that's happening. There's a lot of sort of important projects in play now. But speaking about triangles, one thing that I was reminded of was, back in the day when King Solomon was building his temple, it was basically King Solomon, Hiram Abif was the master architect, and the King Hiram of Tyre. They were the three triangles in the governance of the temple. That's how the temple was built, the three corners of the temple. And so I think as we listen deeply into what's emerging, is that the money world has been, we have had some really interesting archetypes in the world of finance, and that has mostly been the king and the warrior archetype who's really been pushing the finance forward. What's trying to emerge is the magician and lover archetypes. And this is a new thing. And we're all trying to figure it out. So if you listen to, some of the emerging patterns, and if you go back, a few thousand years and how the human history has evolved, how, human psychology has been evolving, we can start to see very clear patterns. There are patterns that are basically different body of knowledge has been pointing towards, whether it be meta theory or developmental psychology, evolutionary psychology. They've been trying to point it out for quite some time. There's new thing emerging, and I think that's what we're listening to. Is that's very exciting to see that. What does the lover archetype transform? How does the lover archetype transform finance? How does the magician archetype transform finance? Right. So, yeah, it's here.
Sushant, I sent you while you were talking earlier. I went into the Mighty Networks for Emerge, the conference that was, I guess, a couple weeks back now, and a few, like maybe 3 or 4 weeks before the actual conference, I put a kind of a provocation, and I'm going to read it to the rest of you because I didn't send, but it says, fun personal takeaway from the Funding the Emergence Zoom call a little bit ago today, which was excellently facilitated and then I listed some names. Then I did an emoji. Can anyone tell me, are there already effective language and investment models for communicating 4 to 7% ROI on funding agape and dharmic service? Smiley face. And if you've already got that for me, I'm also looking for the appropriate asset classes to fund love and care and right relationship and communitas. Then I did an alien face. Said, feel free to DM me with your frameworks and insights, laughing, crying, or post below. And then wrote some other things, but it's right on. So yeah. What's the appropriate asset class for dharmic service? literally. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah. So I love it.
Very funny.
Oh, Jim has to go to dinner with his wife.
I saw. Yeah, deeply grateful for your time. Well, if this is a good place to close, I'm or if you want to jam some more, I have some time and some space, but I'm totally mindful of what everybody's already stayed another 20 minutes, so I appreciate you all for letting me. I'm liking seeing your smile, Scott. I'm just like, it's making me smile. See?
Well,